financialize everything. Everything can be a tradable asset. The universe of what is tradable today versus what it can be is so small. Anything that has a difference in opinion can be traded someday.
Yeah. So basically, I could say, I think who's going to be the next James Bond, or who's going to win the Best Actor Oscar or Actress Oscar. Suddenly, that is a tradable asset.
It's 2012, we're in a ballet studio in Brazil. A teenage girl balances on one toe, the other leg pulled impossibly high, and she holds her breath. Beneath her raised thigh, a cigarette ember glows, almost close enough to scorch her skin but not quite touching. This cigarette is held by her teacher, waiting to see which will break first, the muscle or the girl's will.
But she doesn't waver, and this discipline and determination will mean that in just over a decade, our ballerina will be a billionaire. Welcome to Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service. Each episode we pick a billionaire and we find out how they made their money.
We take them from zero to their first million and then from their million onto a billion.
I'm Simon Jack, I'm the BBC's business editor. That's my day job, which is why I'm wearing a tie.
And I'm Zing Singh, and I'm a journalist, author and podcaster, and I'm not wearing a tie.
Lucky you. Our billionaire this episode is Luana Lopez Lara, just 30 years old, currently worth $2.6 billion. That makes her the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world, beating one of our former billionaires.
Yep, sorry, Lucy Guo, you are no longer in the top spot. Now, you may not have heard of Luana. She's kept her personal life largely private. It's actually quite hard to find out that much about her. But don't worry, because there is a lot to talk about in this episode.
And that's because Luana, along with her business partner, founded the financial tech company Kalshi, Arabic for everything.
And Kalshi is at the forefront of something that's been called gambling, but in her words, it's just another form of trading.
Trading or gambling, a very important distinction, as we'll discover. Now, Kalshi is a prediction market. What the hell is that? Well, it lets anyone place a bet on the outcome of an event, any event in the world. And that was something that was, up until Luana came along, completely illegal in the United States.
Yeah, as Luana says, they look for events that have been ripped directly from the headlines. So, for instance, you go onto Kalshi, you might be able to place a trade on how much snow will fall in New York during a particularly bad snowstorm.
Who will win the Winter Olympics men's hockey gold medal?
What will be the price of a rare Labubu doll?
And, of course, who will win the next US presidential election?
You can think of Kalshi as being like the love child between Wall Street and Vegas. So the whole world is a casino and everyone a player.
But crucially, in the United States, it is not actually considered gambling or betting.
Why? Well, let's travel back to the beginning to find out. You can bet it's going to be quite the story.
Yes, Luana Lopez Lara was born in 1996 in Brazil. As a child, she lived in various cities around the country, ending up as a teenager in Joinville. Her family was big on maths. Her mother was a maths teacher. Even her father was an electrical engineer who had worked at IBM. Her older sister got a degree in chemical engineering and a PhD in industrial engineering. Smart family. Not surprising then that Luana attended the Tupi Technical School, which focused on teaching sciences.
But her first real passion was ballet. Maybe this is one of the first ever ballet billionaires we've ever covered.
Yes.
So in 2011, at the age of around 16 or 17, she enrolled in a ballet school called the Escola de Teatro Bolshoi. And this is the only branch outside of Russia of the celebrated, sometimes controversial Bolshoi Ballet Company. And the Brazilian school granted 100% of scholarships to all students. But you can bet there was a rigorous selection process. And Luana calls these high school years the most intense of her life. And this is someone who, at one point built an $11 billion startup.
And you say rigorous. The days were exactly that. Academic classes were from 7 a.m. till noon, and then ballet classes 1 to 9 p.m. She's just a teenager, remember? And this ballet school emphasises, I think like most of them do, the importance of discipline. She claimed that her ballet teachers held lit cigarettes, as we were hearing, under her thigh while she extended one leg to her ear to see how long she could keep her leg up without getting burned. And this environment did not exactly build camaraderie among the students there. She also claimed that dancers would hide glass shards in each other's shoes in order to injure their rivals and get ahead. We couldn't actually find any response from the school or teachers to those particular claims.
Well, as if this schedule wasn't grueling enough, Luana would study late into the night for academic competitions. So she won gold at the Brazilian Astronomy Olympiad, bronze at the Santa Catarina Mathematics Olympiad. So, I mean, this is clearly a really driven person. It's not enough that she wants to be good at ballet. She's got to dominate maths and science as well.
Horribly competent in all spheres, it seems.
I know. I have to say, I did ballet when I was a small child, very small. I'm going to
I'm
emphasize
saying that
this.
like a surprise.
Can't you tell from my graceful demeanor? But there was, I think, one girl in my class who became my friend, and she's now a prima ballerina.
Really?
You know, you could tell from the get-go that she was driven. There's no way I could have even remotely reached her level. It takes a certain kind of mindset to get to that point.
Yeah.
And if you're the kind of person who wants to get there and also win gold at astronomy competitions, you're quite a rare figure.
Yeah. Melinda French Gates, Bill Gates' ex-wife, pointed out the only correlation they can find of women in the C-suite, that's CEO, CFO, CTO, etc., is that they all played sport. And the thesis of that, says Melinda Gates, is that they didn't mind failing, because in sport, you are bound to fail sometimes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And after graduating, she spent 9 months in Salzburg in Austria, performing as a professional ballerina for a season of Swan Lake. And she said, I always wanted to be the best I could be. That's why I fought to dance at the Bolshoi and then decided to pursue the best universities in the world. When I told my parents this was my plan, they basically said, well, let her try. Who knows? It might work out. And boy, did it.
For Luana, the best universities meant moving to the United States. But most American students start the process of preparing for university admissions in the very first year of high school, right? With preparing for the SATs and things like that. So Luana was actually rather late. And she also felt insecure about writing these applications. She was scared that her focus on ballet would be viewed negatively by these elite academic institutions.
Yeah, well, they probably like that sense of discipline and pursuit of perfection. And she needn't have worried because she got accepted into 3 minor universities called Harvard, Yale and Stanford.
You might have heard of them.
You might have heard of them. Quite a lot of our billionaires went to one, particularly Stanford. But she did not. She actually chose to attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, better known as MIT. And it's worth noting that education in the US is incredibly expensive. At the time she was going, it was probably around $60,000 a year. It's probably about $100,000 at the time of recording. But fortunately, she got a maths scholarship from the Estudar Foundation, which pays for tuition for talented Brazilians.
So Luana moved to the United States in 2014 to study for a bachelor's degree in computer science and mathematics, and then a master's of engineering. According to Luana, the great advantage of the university for me wasn't the classes and the things I learned, although they were excellent. It was the people I came in contact with.
I think that's true of any university experience, isn't it? That's what you take away with you, you know, your friends, but also a network sometimes of people, particularly at some of these elite US universities. And into this crowd walked Tarek Mansour. He was an international student, also majoring in computer science. Born in California, but had grown up in Lebanon, and he'd been 11 years old during the 2007 Lebanon conflict. Now, like Luana, he, of course, having got there, was an overachiever. He taught himself English while studying for the SATs. He finished second in France's Maths Olympiad, which sounds mind-bogglingly difficult. And she would always sit in the front row in their advanced computer classes. So was he, and soon they started to sit next to each other and they became friends.
God, what happened to gifted children becoming burnouts and failing? This clearly did not happen to either of them because their holidays were not spent relaxing at home. Luana made sure she got internships at really impressive financial institutions like hedge fund Bridgewater Associates and Citadel Securities.
These are literally the biggest hedge funds in the world. You know, they run by Ken Griffin runs Citadel, Ray Dalio runs Bridgewater. These people are multi-billionaires. They are powerhouses on Wall Street.
And internships are like gold dust.
Yeah.
Well, in their senior year in 2018, both Luana and Tarek got an internship in New York at Five Rings Capital. That is a big proprietary trading firm. So they trade their own money rather than their clients. And it sells itself as this kind of casual, young, fast-paced place. There's a flat structure. So there's not this hierarchical, organization of guys in suits at the very top.
And it was one evening walking back from work, they had their light bulb eureka moment when Luana had an idea that would change both their lives. She'd noticed two things while working at Five Rings. First, that traders would price in external events to their investment decisions. So, for example, an upcoming election might make things make more volatile. A hurricane can change things like crop prices. And second, that when traders weren't working, they were almost always gambling with each other on whatever was going on in the news. It could have been absolutely anything. And I've got to say, having worked in financial services many, many moons ago, I can recognise that people would literally bet on anything, whether it was how many corners Arsenal would get in the coming game, the over-under about how many runs England would score against India. They would bet on everything. And websites, cropped up so you could kind of begin to bet on that. But it's pretty limited. And it was called gambling in those days.
Were you good at it? Did you win anything on those bets?
I like to think I was, but my memory is probably incredibly selective.
Right. Okay. Good to know. Well, Luana's insight into all of this was that most trading happens, in her words, when people have some view about the future and then try to find a way to put that into the markets. But she thought there should be a way for people to directly trade on the probability of events rather than indirectly through traditional financial markets.
Right.
Tarek immediately saw the potential in this idea, so together they decided to create a business. And they called the startup Kalshi, which means everything in Arabic. And that was the core of the idea. So in Tarek's words, financialize everything. Everything can be a tradable asset. The universe of what is tradable today versus what it can be is so small. Anything that has a difference in opinion can be traded someday.
Yeah. So basically, I could say, I think who's going to be the next James Bond, or who's going to win the Best Actor Oscar or Actress Oscar. We have a difference of opinion. Suddenly, that is a tradable asset. Mm-hmm. Anywhere where opinions differ, there's a potential trade there. But you need more than a good idea to become a billionaire. So a few months after graduating, they applied to something called Y Combinator, which we have come across on this program before. If you haven't listened to our previous episode on Sam Altman, the Y Combinator is this kind of accelerator for startups, which has created a lot of billionaires, things like companies like Airbnb, Reddit, Stripe, Twitch, Scale AI, another previous episode. And to win a place on it, Luana and Tarek flew to Silicon Valley and competed in a hackathon. It's kind of a computer programming sort of test. In 24 hours, they built a website, they presented it to Y Combinator's panel of entrepreneurs, pitching it as a New York Stock Exchange for events.
Very grand title there. Unfortunately, their prototype barely worked, but they were still accepted. A partner of Y Combinator, Michael Siebel, told them their idea was so unlikely to succeed, I had to take a chance. So from January to March in 2019, they spent 3 months in the intensive program, that kind of hothouse program. They got mentoring, plus they got $150,000 investment into Kalshi. And around this time, Forbes published its first article about Kalshi and its founders. And in it, noted that a sizable portion of what they were hoping to do was still currently illegal.
And let's unpack why that is, because the gambling and betting laws in the United States are quite different from elsewhere, certainly from the UK. Online gambling, sports betting, political betting was effectively illegal across most of the United States. However, in 2019, I remember this, it was a big moment, the Supreme Court struck down an act which made it illegal, which meant that states were free to legalize whatever they wanted in terms of betting on a state-by-state basis, so the state gets to decide. So it's created, if you like, a patchwork system where it's legal in some states, not legal in others. It's not ideal to build a big business when you have a patchwork.
Y Combinator's partner Michael Siebel said, the reason we don't see more tech startups tackle this opportunity is because of the regulatory barriers that make it hard to get a product up and running. But he added, the Kalshi founders have the determination to overcome these regulatory challenges. Because Luana and Tarek had entered Y Combinator with a regulatory strategy. First, they positioned Kalshi not as gambling, oh no, never gambling. This was a prediction market. So they wouldn't use traditional gambling wagers. Kalshi would use what they call event contracts.
Yeah, okay. And it's a bit complicated, this, so bear with us. So what would happen is Kalshi would allow users to sort of buy and sell this binary idea that either this event is going to happen, which is a 1, or it doesn't happen, it's a 0. So, and price between $0 and $1. And basically the market would set the probability of that happening, and that's when people would exchange their ideas. So you might think that there's a 50% chance that Callum Turner's going to be the next Bond. I might think there's a 75% chance of doing that. So I would basically be able to trade that thinking that I'm going to be more right than you, and so I will make money. So the contract settles at $1 if the event occurs, 0 if it doesn't. And what this platform, Kalshi, is doing is matching our difference of opinion on an exchange. They're not betting their own money, they're matching people's differing opinions.
So, for instance, imagine the event contract. Will Zing Zing become a billionaire in this year? And it's trading at 25 cents for yes, meaning the market believes there's roughly a 25% chance of that outcome. Thanks
I've
very
got
much
to tell you,
to the market.
that's a massive overestimate.
Well, if you bought a yes contract at 25 cents, and I do indeed become a billionaire this year, you profit 75 cents per contract.
Right.
So traders can also exit early by selling their position while it's still fluctuating. So in that sense, it's sort of like the stock market.
So yes, so if I think there's a 25% chance that you're going to become a billionaire. When you get to $500 million, the chances of that happening obviously have gone
Going
up
up.
because maybe it's a 70% chance now that you're going to make it all the way to $1 billion. I can cash out my position now because I've taken it from 25 to 75. So in that sense, you're right. It is a bit like the changing fortunes of a company or a stock market. So, in a way, you can sort of see the logical kind of leap they've made there.
I mean, your mileage may differ on this one.
Yeah.
But if you're asking how does Kalshi actually make money off all of these event contracts, Kalshi would make that cash by charging a commission on every trade. So, of course, it also has the potential to sell data to traders, to businesses, political parties, etc. Importantly, prediction markets were already regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, under commodities law, not under gambling law. So event contracts like the one that Kalshi was trying to produce are treated as financial derivatives rather than bets.
Yeah.
So Kalshi was saying, oh no, we're not your classic bookies or gambling, firms. We're actually a financial exchange for predictions.
And this argument is absolutely fundamental to how this whole story pans out, because what they needed to do this was a federal license, federal meaning it'll work in every state, from the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. But this is not going to be easy. There already existed some examples of prediction markets, but there were strict limits on the amount you could bet, trade, and the number of traders. Large-scale, fully commercial event prediction platforms were not broadly approved. So they're breaking some new ground here.
And you might ask yourself, why is this the case? Well, the regulators had always been concerned about insider trading.
Bingo.
So a real-world example from this very year, someone earned $400,000 in profit on a rival prediction market, not Kalshi, by betting the exact date that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro would be forced out from power. The suspicion, of course, was that they had prior knowledge that would happen on that day because they had some kind of, real-world link to the Maduro presidency. Similarly, there was a lot of activity on Kalshi around military action in Iran. And, this is really worrying because it could incentivize investors to influence events in the world. So imagine you're a lawmaker who delays a bill because you can earn some big bucks on a prediction market. So this was always going to be an uphill struggle to get regulatory approval.
I mean, the insider trading potential would seem to me to be vast. And indeed, that military bloke is being prosecuted for that particular example. And what is amazing to me is that someone came and bet big on the exact date that a Venezuelan president was going to be forced out of office. I would go, hang on a second.
What do you know that I don't?
What do you know that I don't? Exactly. So, anyway, we'll get into that at some greater length. But Luana and Tarek said that one day at Y Combinator, the accelerator they were in, they cold called over 60 lawyers they'd found on Google. Every single one of them told them to give up. People have been unsuccessfully trying to do this since the 1980s. And Luana and Tarek, they were too young, they're too small fry. And she said, right out of college, we were taking on an insane amount of risk. It was 2 years without a single product, nothing launched. And if we didn't get regulated, the company would just go to zero.
But then they found just the man that they needed, a guy who was a lawyer and former CFTC official called Jeff Bandman, who promised them that the landscape was changing. Jeff knew the CFTC, he knew the people inside, so he agreed to lead their regulatory strategy.
Yeah.
Talk about an angel dropping from the
Well,
sky.
this is interesting. There are very often these kind of non-player characters in these stories that seem to have just wander onto set in this drama and are absolutely pivotal. And Jeff Bandman, who I don't suppose anyone has ever heard of, is absolutely instrumental in this story. They had first approached the CFTC, the Commodity and Futures Trading Commission, in the spring of 2019. When COVID hit, Luana was in London, Tarek was at home in Beirut. He was there during that city's port explosion. I just remember that incredible boom that killed over 200 people. And for weeks, he would go searching for survivors during the day. He would work on Kalshi at night. But with the guidance of Jeff, Luana and Tarek spent over a year lobbying the commission on Zoom. Before each meeting, this is interesting, they would memorize a script that they were going to sort of, pitch to them, and they would memorize it word for word. So they were on message the whole time.
Now, during this time, Kalshi wasn't the only game in town. A few competitors had popped up, most notably Polymarket, who, unlike them, hadn't sought regulatory approval and were letting people bet vast sums of money anonymously with cryptocurrency.
Right.
But in this case, it actually helped Kalshi because they were trying to do everything by the book.
Yeah, so they could say they're the good corporate citizen here. They were trying to do something, they were trying to jump through the right regulatory hoops. But while they were working to become legal at all, they were also trying to raise money. They got big support from a venture capital firm called Neo. Now, Neo was founded by an early Facebook investor called Ali Partovi, and Neo led their seed funding. That's some of the original capital you get in, and that brought some validation that somebody like that was prepared to back them. The market, sits up and pays attention. Well, if this guy's backing them, maybe there's something to it. More traditional Wall Street investors like Sequoia Capital, they crop up in a lot of our stories. They were waiting to see that crucial thing about what happens with the CFTC, the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission.
And then in November 2020, after 2 years of back and forth, Luana finally got a call from the chairman of the CFTC, who'd been appointed by President Donald Trump the previous year. And the chairman said, "You now stand with markets that have been around since the 1840s. I have no doubt that in time you'll grow to be a powerhouse too." And so for the first time ever in its history, the CFTC had given its approval to two 24-year-olds. Kalshi was the first federally regulated events-based trading exchange in United States history.
And this is a big moment. And now it was time, with that in their back pocket, to raise some serious money. Within weeks, they announced they'd raised $30 million in a Series A funding led by venture capital giant Sequoia, we just discussed. So Luana Lopez Lara is a millionaire at the start of 2021, aged just 24.
Well, let's take this 24-year-old from $1 million to $1 billion. So this was, if you're keeping track of the timelines, this was only 5 years ago. So this is going to be one of our fastest journeys from millionaire to billionaire. And Kalshi is now legal and it's got funding. But the real question is, are people actually going to use it? So it's July 2021. It's time to open it up to the public. And at this stage, it was just a website. A smartphone app was still to come. And initial activity was, modest.
Well, it takes a bit of getting your head around. But eventually, more and more contracts started to roll in. And some officials at the CFTC became a bit concerned. And according to Bloomberg, the division, CFTC, demoralized and overrun, kind of accepted defeat and stopped fighting back, some of the people say. By the end of 2021, 3 senior officials had left the agency, including the head of the division and the head of the product review team. Interestingly, a former member of the CFTC joined Kalshi's board not long after leaving. Gamekeeper turned poacher.
Talk about a revolving door.
Yeah.
Well, soon Kalshi had dozens of events contracts on their website, things that people could essentially bet on issues like, will there be negative GDP growth by Q4? Will NASA land a person on the moon before 2025? Who will win the Oscar for Best Actor?
Yeah.
I mean, I recently was following the Met Gala and people were betting on what designer a rapper called A$AP Rocky was going to wear.
Right.
I mean, it's that tiny, minute detail. That's the kind of stuff that people are betting on.
Yeah, and somebody knows the answer to that.
Exactly. It's
Right.
not very hard to figure out.
At the end of 2021, they launched markets on the outcomes of US Supreme Court cases. Real moral hazard in this one, I think. A hugely popular bet was whether the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, J. Powell, would be replaced by the then President Joe Biden. It got over nearly 250,000 contracts. At this point, wages were capped at $25,000, but Luana had the ambition to push that limit much higher. 6 months after launching to the public, they had processed $10 million worth of trade. So it's beginning to get some momentum.
And the world was taking notice. Forbes put Luana, still 25 years old, on their 30 under 30 list for 2022. And at this stage, Tarek was acting as more of Kalshi's public face. It's his picture, for instance, in the Forbes article. All of this makes it quite hard to get a sense of Luana and how she's feeling at this point. I mean, if you look at her Instagram profile, she's this kind of very blonde, statuesque. I mean, you can tell she used to be a ballerina. She holds herself really upright. All activity from before 2024 on her X account, her Twitter account, is missing. So she's quite a private person.
Right. We know, however, that the company itself was growing fast. That year, they had an office in New York. They had a staff of 32. In one of our Instagram posts of their first office, there's a sign that simply reads, "Make money at Kalshi." And they were, by this point, trading 2 million contracts a week.
And over the next couple of years, Kalshi slowly grew its user base. In 2023, they had their first individual user cross $1 million in yearly income on Kalshi. So they were making $1 million just from these bets, basically. Trades, event contracts. And on the horizon, there was something very important about to happen, the Trump versus Harris presidential election. And Kalshi, of course, knew they were ready to capitalize on this big event.
Yeah, but there's a little setback for them. In 2023, the CFTC, the police, if you like, for this area, blocked Kalshi's contracts on the election. They said they looked too much like gambling and were not in the public interest. But Luana decided to fight back. And against the advice of her investors, she sued the CFTC on the grounds that the regulator had overstepped its bounds. And the suit claimed it is undeniable that election outcomes have consequences for everyone. They play a pivotal role in determining our collective future. So they're that important, they can be traded.
Well, jump forward to September 2024, just weeks before the election, and the US District Court judge ruled in favor of Kalshi. So this meant that, again, Kalshi made history by offering the first legal election contracts in the US in over a century. And of course, Kalshi's users wanted to bet on the election, so Kalshi surged to the #1 spot on Apple's App Store.
Yeah, because people do like to bet on politics. You know, it happens in the UK quite a lot. It's actually perfectly legal, and it's called gambling over here.
Although, interestingly, Kalshi is not allowed to operate in the UK.
No, it is not legal. In fact, I tried to sign up before this thing and said, sorry, illegal in your jurisdiction. So that's too bad. I was really wanting to have a go. Anyway, what's interesting is that with so many bets coming in the days before the election, Kalshi was actually strapped for cash. But remember that early investor we talked about, Ali Partovi at Neo? He WhatsApped both of them to let them know he was going to wire them. By the way, I'm going to wire you $12 million. That's $5 million from Neo, his company, and $7 million from his own back pocket, from me personally. And in his message, he said, "We can figure out the terms later." Says no one ever.
I mean, I feel like I've hit the jackpot if my friend pays for my Uber.
Yeah.
I mean, let alone $7 million.
In total, users bet $500 million in that election on the candidates. And Kalshi predicted Donald Trump's victory more accurately and faster and before traditional polls. That's really interesting.
Well, with political betting now on the table, it's time for serious money, even more serious than the figures we've talked about before, to enter the chat. So Luana hadn't sought investment for 3 years, but over 2025, she held 3 funding rounds. So you call these like C, D, E funding rounds. In June, they raised $185 million, led by a crypto venture capital firm called Paradigm. This now placed the company at a $2 billion valuation, making it officially a unicorn.
Which is basically a startup which is worth over $1 billion.
And in October, they raised another $300 million, led by Sequoia Capital and Andreessen Horowitz. Kalshi was now worth $5 billion, and that is a 150% increase in just 4 months.
And when you've got Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz behind you, you know, that means that they're considered the smart money in Silicon Valley. These people have made billions about backing winners.
But actually, that's not just it, because 2 months after that, in December, they raised a further $1 billion.
Yeah, that's a very rapid capital raise. I would say unusually rapid, although, you know, we keep setting new records. Nevertheless, clearly the venture capitalists think that they're onto something that could be very big, and they are piling money in, hand over fist.
Well, this last funding round valued Kalshi at $11 billion in total, and by this point, she owned 12% of the company, putting her net worth at $1.3 billion.
Bing.
So, age just 29, this made her the world's youngest self-made woman billionaire, actually ousting a previous billionaire we've covered on the show, Lucy Guo, from her very top spot.
That was a short-lived reign for Lucy, wasn't it, in this crazy world?
She can always claw it back, though. I'm sure she could.
I'm sure she's not suffering too badly. Let's just take Luana beyond $1 billion, because at this point, once you've got that billionaire tag on you, the media really started paying attention. Forbes ran a huge profile on her. Tarek was sort of barely mentioned. He's being shoved slightly
Poor
to the
Tarek.
background. She's become more active on X. She posts funny quips and memes. Her banner image on X is a South Park meme. And her pinned post is a response to a Bloomberg article titled "Two Maths Nerds Crack Open Legalized Gambling on Wall Street," to which she jokes, "I prefer calling myself a math connoisseur, but fine."
Well, she's got a sense of humor.
Yeah.
She also seems to have a lot more confidence, and it's no surprise because by the end of 2025, Kalshi was trading over $1 billion every week.
Wow.
But I think it's still relatively niche, and I wonder how many of our listeners have used it or heard of it because, we don't allow it in the UK. I doubt very many people in the UK have seen it.
I think people have heard of it, but probably might not be able to use it wherever you're listening or watching this, because, like I say, in many countries it is. There's quite a long list of countries where it's illegal, but it's piqued the interest of people worldwide for two reasons. One is, it's kind of fun to be able to bet on how much rain is going to fall, and it's a bit like betting on trading on raindrops running down a window pane. Who hasn't done that? Or two snails racing or something.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean? It's sort of kind of fun. But also I think people thinking, gosh, surely there are going to be people who actually know what's going to happen, who will have an unfair information advantage, which usually the police of the trading world are very, very hot on. So it still seems to some, I think, like a bit of an anomaly.
Well, Luana's next move, I think, was to position the company to try and get it to break the mainstream.
Yeah.
And to do this, she's partnered with some household names. So Kalshi has made a big deal with Google to include their prediction market data into its finance platform. So essentially being able to stand up and say, hey, we're on the same level of the big dogs.
It's like it's almost like the ticker that runs down on those financial shows like
Exactly.
CNN and CNBC.
And so those news channels are actually going to run real-time news tickers displaying Kalshi data along the bottom of their screens.
Yeah.
And so in March 2026, they also announced they're expanding outside the United States. They launched their first ever international operations in Luana's home country of Brazil.
Yeah, so obviously she's probably considered a homecoming hero in her home country. So we've tried to explain what Kalshi is. We've understood how big it can be because basically, as Tarek said in the early days, the universe of what you can trade is kind of small at the moment. It's like share prices or the price of copper or gold. This is everything, what Kalshi means in Arabic. This is, you can trade everything. And therefore, the addressable market is almost infinite, really, because it means you can pretty much bet on anything. But as we've said, there were those grave concerns, as we've seen in this case against the military guy from Fort Bragg who bet on the Maduro being ousted. He's being prosecuted because, somebody knew what was going on. And that's why, those concerns continue to hover over this industry.
Exactly. I mean, it's worth talking about some of those concerns in detail because the first one that comes to mind is Kalshi just gambling disguised in finance terms?
I'm not saying anything.
We know the negative effect that gambling can have on some people. We've covered that story in Denise Coates' episode. She's the founder of Bet365.
Yeah.
Arguably, you could say this could be more addictive because, like you say, the market for potential bets is infinite.
Because everyone's got an opinion about something, haven't they? Now, people might not have an opinion about whether Microsoft stock was going up or down, so wouldn't be trading that.
Not everyone's a football fan.
But everyone's got an opinion on who should be the next James Bond or who should win the Best Actor Oscar. So if you're inviting those people into this world of trading, you're, increasing the universe of people who will take a punt on something because they think people have, they always think they're right. And
everyone thinks they've got the inside information.
Now, but Kalshi argues that it is highly scrutinized, it's regulated, and Tarek has said in casinos and gambling houses, the revenue they make is out of customers' losses, out of their pockets. You get these weird incentives in the industry. For us, we just take transaction fees. We're not taking money out of anyone's losses. So our gain is not our users' losses. The losses are between the users, not you against the house, if you see what I mean.
Right. I mean, if you're on the losing end of a $5,000 events trading contract, I think you would struggle to see the difference.
Yeah, I guess that's right. And we've talked about, traders with in-depth knowledge of an event. Some people know more about stuff than others. Some people are more informed. And Kalshi's got an argument for that too. They say it democratizes financial opportunities for the average person, saying, why not, maybe you know as much as everyone else.
That is an interesting take. I mean, on the other hand, you could also argue it just turns politics and real life events into just a game, right? Should we really be turning political decisions about who should be the next prime minister or president into tradable assets?
Yeah.
Is that the kind of mentality we want to be encouraging in people?
I suppose the worry is, does the tail begin to wag the dog, in the sense that the financial interests of the outcome becomes an agent in determining the outcome? Do you see what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So because you want to win big on an event contract about Trump becoming president, you end up voting for Trump.
Yeah.
Because you see that the odds are in your favor.
Yeah. Or, is this going to happen before a certain date, for example? I might ring the person who's got, who makes the decision on when this decision is going to happen, saying, I've got a lot of money riding on this. I'll split it with you if you push it out another month or two, for example. I'm not saying this happens, but that, clearly there's potential for that.
We've already seen rumors about this kind of stuff. So people were speculating that when the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, abruptly ended the press conference early, right before the 65-minute mark that traders on Kalshi had bet thousands of dollars on. And now, important to say, neither the White House nor Kalshi have commented on this.
Kalshi argues that when it comes to politics, for example, it actually enhances democratic engagement. Participation can lead to more informed discussion, more informed analyses of election outcomes.
Yeah, I guess if you've got a few grand riding on the outcome of an election, you will be incentivized to keep up with the news.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Kalshi says on its part that it explicitly bans insider trading and investigates suspicious behavior.
Yeah.
And, there are supporters of these prediction markets. People say that they can be a force for good. So better forecasts, for instance. Prediction markets are often actually very accurate. In the same way they predicted Trump winning the presidency, they attract people with good information. So, that news broke ahead of mainstream outlets during the election. Well, let's not forget Kalshi and other prediction markets are going to make some people a lot of money. In fact, Donald Trump Jr. actually joined Kalshi's advisory board in 2025.
I see.
And it's definitely made our ballerina a lot of money. In May 2026, it was reported that Luana and Tarek had more than doubled their net worth in just 6 months after yet another $1 billion funding round.
It is still growing. They've made a ton of money. It's controversial. It's illegal in some countries, but it seems to be doing fantastically well in the US. So what we need to ask ourselves is the question, is Luana Lopez Lara good, bad, or just another billionaire? But first, we do this fun bit where we score our billionaires on several categories, from 0 to 10 on categories wealth, controversy, power, and legacy. And we always start, because that's the name of the game on this podcast, with wealth. What do you reckon?
Well, Luana, currently worth $2.6 billion. So entry-level billionaire compared to some of our bigger fish like Elon Musk.
But you went from $1 million 5 years ago to $1 billion. And remember, $1 billion is 1,000 million. So this is a very rapid ascent indeed.
I mean, yeah, it is increasing rapidly. And, a lot of people think Kalshi and other prediction markets could be worth a lot more.
We often look about how far they've come. Is it a rags to riches story? She came from Brazil, but from a solidly middle-class educated family. She went to the best school. She was a high achiever. She went to MIT. So I'm going to give her, just on the sheer speed that she's gone from $1 million to $1 billion, I'm going to give her higher than I would normally just for the absolute number. And I'm going to give her a 6 because I think it's incredible how quickly this has grown.
Oh, I think I'd be inclined to agree with a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
Because that amount of growth in her bank account, I mean, in how much she's worth.
Yeah.
That is actually quite exceptional, given the fact that she's only 30 this year.
Wow. Okay, 6 for each of us. Controversy. There's quite a lot to choose from here.
Quite a lot, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot about, the controversy about issues related to prediction markets, the potential for the amount of money riding on an outcome to influence the outcome itself, to become
also,
a factor.
The potential for people to get way too involved and develop addiction issues.
Yeah. I mean, all of those things relate to the business model rather than to Luana herself. I think there's no suggestion that she's behaved improperly.
I do think, however, we are at the early beginnings of Kalshi and other prediction markets. I think it'll take a while for the full ramifications of their existence to become clear.
I think it's quite early to tell. Nevertheless, I'm going to give this a high score. I'm going to give her an 8.
Wow. I'm going to give her a 7, actually.
Okay.
Because I think, the very existence of prediction markets, I think there's room for them to grow in controversy, even more so.
Okay, so you're giving 7 with room to grow.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it.
Room
Okay.
to improve, some might say.
Improve, if that's the way you want to look at it. Power, I mean, because of her, this new thing exists in the world, or, certainly because of her almost unbelievably successful efforts to persuade the authorities that this was a goer and therefore it became a federal kind of all US thing. That's pretty amazing. So, without her, you could argue that, maybe this wouldn't exist. Obviously, there's Polymarket as well. Her convincing the CFTC that this was not gambling and this was trading, that was a major coup.
Yeah, and bear in mind, at the time they convinced the CFTC, they were just a couple of 20-something-year-olds.
Yeah, and people have been trying for this for decades to try and get this approved. And
to
didn't,
no
and she
success.
Did.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, a partner at Kalshi's investor, Andreessen Horowitz, said there are few better trainings for being told no and pushing through anyway than being a professional ballerina.
Yeah.
An injury, even a short rest, could mean losing your spot. Luana learned persistence with grace early on, and she's carried that same calm confidence into building Kalshi.
So we've sort of mentioned this already, but basically, Polymarket was not regulated or approved, and now it is, thanks to Kalshi and her efforts. So in a way, that market now exists legally because of her. And who knows how powerful this will become. We've talked about some of the potential repercussions. So on power, I think it's, I think it's quite high. I think it's I'm going to give it a 7.
Ooh, I think I'm going to maybe do slightly lower than you and do a 6 out of 10.
Okay.
I just feel like, yes, she essentially made this whole industry from scratch, but would people necessarily recognize her name? I don't think they would.
No, true enough. Yeah, you're probably right, but we'll stick to our scores. And on legacy, I think this one, as you've already alluded to, it's too soon to tell. I mean, in a way, you've kind of created a monster here, haven't you? I mean, you've created something that could become incredibly powerful, influential. And, I don't know, twin this with AI, where do you end up,
Everyone's going to be jobless during events
the future
contracts.
of humanity being traded by AI, the whole future of the world is going to become a kind of tradable asset.
Well, this is interesting. Y Combinator's partner, Michael Siebel, remember him, said, I don't know that we have funded a company that has as much potential impact on the world as this one.
Yeah, in a good way or a bad way, who knows?
Unclear.
He wasn't clear about that.
Tarek said that he thinks that this will be bigger than crypto.
Wow. Okay. And just to, Bitcoin alone is worth $2 and a bit trillion. So we might need a new category for these guys at some point.
Yeah, well, I think legacy, I'm going to score them pretty highly.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to give Luana 8 out of 10.
We'll either look back on this period saying this was one of the most fundamental things to sort of change the way we're informed and the events are traded, or we'll look back on this and say, what were we thinking? Anyway, so the question is she good, bad, or just another billionaire? That is up to you. What do you think? Email goodbadbillionaire, that's all one word, at bbc.com, or drop us a text or WhatsApp at 001 917 686 1176 and tell us what you think.
And don't forget to include your name, as we may read out your message on a future episode.
Indeed, we got an email from Steve from Weymouth in England. The email subject, interesting, was morality. I just wanted to say we shouldn't be celebrating billionaires. It's morally wrong that 12 people have as much wealth as half the world's population. It's also morally wrong that most billionaires pay less tax proportionately than normal taxpayers. The taxation system should be adjusted so that no one could become a billionaire. You're not the first person to say that, Steve. Thanks very much indeed for your email, and it's something that people get in touch with us and is uppermost in a lot of people's minds a lot of the time.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss a single episode. And if you're watching in the UK and would like to listen to even more episodes of Good Bad Billionaire, follow the link in the description.